I made mistakes, mistakes that cost me everything. I had no idea how far I would fall, how much I would lose. It's a story of regret, pain, and a path I should never have taken. But it's also a story that needs to be told, from the very beginning to where it all unraveled. Follow my journey, and watch to the end. You'll see how quickly life can change and how, sometimes, the hardest lessons come too late.
In the bustling city of Lagos, a couple named Tund and Ifeoma knew the harsh sting of poverty all too well. They began their journey in the crowded slums of Ajigunle, where survival was a daily battle. Tund, a determined man with a talent for fixing things, started as a roadside mechanic with nothing more than a few tools and a makeshift shelter. His wife, Ifeoma, complemented his efforts with her small food stall, where she sold akara and pap to locals. Their days were long, and their nights were filled with dreams of a better future. They vowed that their children would never face the hardships they had endured. This shared vision of prosperity kept them going through the toughest of times. The turning point came unexpectedly. One rainy afternoon, a luxury car broke down near Tund's workshop. Its owner, a prominent businessperson named Chief Oladipo, was stranded and visibly frustrated. Drenched from head to toe, Tund approached the car, offering his assistance. At first, Chief Oladipo was skeptical, wary of entrusting his expensive vehicle to a roadside mechanic. However, with few options in the pouring rain, he reluctantly agreed. Tund worked meticulously, carefully diagnosing the problem despite the challenging weather conditions. He spent hours under the hood, his hands moving with precision and expertise. His determination and attention to detail didn't go unnoticed by Chief Oladipo, who observed him with growing curiosity. By nightfall, Tund had not only repaired the car but also identified a potential issue that could have caused future breakdowns. He explained everything in simple terms, ensuring that Chief Oladipo understood the work done and the preventive measures suggested. Impressed by Tund's honesty, professionalism, and skill, Chief Oladipo decided to test him further. He handed Tund his business card and asked him to come by his company the next day. Tund, though nervous, saw this as an opportunity to prove himself. The next day, Tund arrived at the company, where he was presented with a challenge to inspect and service several vehicles in their fleet. He was given a deadline that seemed impossible to meet, but Tund accepted the challenge without hesitation. Working tirelessly, he showcased his ability to manage time effectively and deliver quality work. By the end of the week, not only had Tund completed the task, but he also provided a detailed report on the condition of each vehicle, suggesting maintenance plans that would save the company money in the long run. His thoroughness and dedication won Chief Oladipo's trust, leading to a contract to maintain the entire fleet. Ifeoma's catering business also began to flourish. Her natural flair for cooking, combined with a growing reputation, attracted bigger orders for events and parties. Her small stall blossomed into a thriving catering service, delivering meals across the city. The couple's hard work and dedication slowly paid off. They moved from the slums of Ajigunle to a modest but comfortable apartment in Surulere. Their dreams of a better life were no longer just dreams, they were tangible realities. They upgraded their living standards step by step, saving meticulously and avoiding any form of wasteful spending. After years of disciplined effort, they achieved a level of financial security that allowed them to afford a spacious home in the upscale neighborhood of Lekki. This home symbolized the culmination of their struggles, a haven where their family could thrive without the shadows of hunger or fear of eviction looming over them. Their story was one of hope, perseverance, and the rewards of hard work. But amidst their newfound wealth, they made one crucial mistake. They equated love with material provision, believing that giving their son everything they never had was the ultimate expression of their affection. The birth of Chidi was a turning point for Tund and Ifeoma, a blessing they believed to be the key to their financial success. It wasn't just the birth of their son, but the perfect timing of it that convinced them Chitty was their good luck charm. Within days of his arrival, Tund had fixed Chief Oladipo's broken-down car, leading to a lucrative contract that pulled them out of poverty. To them, it seemed like a sign from above. Chitty's very presence had brought them prosperity. The new house, the luxury items, the endless opportunities, they all seemed to arrive the moment he was born. Chitty was no longer just their child, he was a symbol of their success, their reward for years of struggle. They believed he was the reason their lives had changed, and so they made sure he never felt the weight of hardship. Chitty's first toys were not the hand-me-downs of his parents' past. He had the best gadgets, the latest clothes, and every convenience a child could wish for. Ifeoma and Tund constantly reassured him that he was special, that he was the reason they were now able to live the life they'd always dreamed of. He didn't just have everything, he had it all because, to his parents, he was the living embodiment of their success. Chitty grew up in a world of abundance, where nothing was ever out of reach. His life was a far cry from the struggles his parents had faced. By age 10, he had everything, the best gadgets, the latest sneakers, and a wardrobe that could rival those of children much older than him. It wasn't enough for Chitty to have just one toy, he had a collection of them, each more extravagant than the last. But as he grew, so did his demands. No longer satisfied with just material goods, Chitty began to expect the same treatment from everyone around him. He saw no reason why people shouldn't cater to his every whim. He had been taught that his desires were paramount, and if they weren't fulfilled, there was always someone else to blame. One afternoon, when Chitty was 11, he insisted on having the latest gaming console, even though his previous one was barely a year old. When his mother hesitated, Chitty threw a fit, demanding the console right away. "I'm your son. I deserve it," he shouted, stomping his feet. Tund overheard the commotion and, without a second thought, handed Ifeoma the money to purchase it. "Don't spoil him too much," Tund said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ifeoma, already too caught up in the whirlwind of their new wealth, dismissed his concerns. "He's not like other children. He deserves everything," she replied, handing Chitty the gaming console. Chitty's behavior was becoming increasingly entitled, yet his parents were blind to it. They were too caught up in their desire to give him everything they never had, too eager to shield him from hardship, and too quick to dismiss any signs of rebellion or disrespect. As Chitty entered his teenage years, the seeds of entitlement he had been given began to sprout into dangerous behaviors. At school, he often teased other children for not wearing designer clothes or having the latest gadgets. He could never understand why anyone would want to live any other way. One afternoon, during a school outing, Chitty's group of friends was in the school's parking lot when they saw a boy named Fola. Fola was a quiet, awkward student whose family couldn't afford the same luxuries that Chitty had grown used to. Chitty and his friends began laughing at Fola's worn-out shoes, mocking him for not being cool enough to afford the latest pair. "Look at him, so pathetic," Chitty jeered. Fola, visibly embarrassed, tried to walk away, but Chitty stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You'll never fit in, will you?" he taunted, enjoying the power his wealth gave him. Ifeoma and Tund were told of the incident later, but instead of confronting their son, they found excuses. "Boys will be boys," Tund said, shrugging. He didn't mean anything by it. Ifeoma agreed. "Chitty's just teasing, he doesn't understand the effect it has on others." They believed their son was simply expressing his confidence that, in their eyes, was a result of his rightful place in their successful world. After the incident with Fola, his treatment of those around him became even more distasteful. He saw no boundaries between himself and others, his entitlement extended not only to his peers but to the household staff as well. One evening, while the housemaid, Ngozi, was in the bathroom, Chitty snuck up to the door, peeking through the small gap to watch her undress and bathe. He didn't think much of it, believing he had the right to see whatever he wanted because of the power his family's wealth afforded him. Later, when the family hired another maid, Chidi's behavior escalated. One afternoon, as the maid, Amara, was cleaning the garage, Chidi approached her and made an inappropriate comment about her appearance. When she turned away to avoid him, he reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her closer with an unsettling grin. "You should be grateful I even notice you," he said coldly. Amara quickly pulled away, visibly shaken, but Chidi only laughed, dismissing her discomfort. His treatment of the maids and the gateman, Kelechi, was no better. He often ordered them around as though they were invisible, giving them commands with no regard for their dignity. When Kelechi, the gateman, failed to open the gate fast enough, Chidi would call him lazy and slap the back of his head, all while his parents turned a blind eye, believing their son could do no wrong. The staff was terrified of Chidi's arrogance, but no one dared speak up, as his parents always shielded him from any consequences. As Chidi's social circle grew, his friends began to reflect his values of wealth and status. They were all from wealthy families, and together, they formed a clique that looked down on anyone who wasn't on their level. Chidi felt empowered, but he also became more isolated from those who couldn't afford to keep up with his lifestyle. One evening, during a sleepover at Chidi's house, his friends began talking about their parents' businesses and the extravagant things they had done with their money. Chidi joined in the conversation, boasting about his father's new car and his mother's latest designer handbag. "My parents buy me whatever I want," he bragged, casually throwing a stack of cash on the table. His friends looked at him with admiration, but also a bit of envy. The more they indulged his stories, the more Chidi felt validated. He was the center of attention, and his wealth made him feel powerful. However, it was clear that his friendships were not based on genuine connection, they were based on his family's status. In one instance, during a birthday party, Chidi asked a girl named Titi to dance, but when she refused, he immediately called her a nobody in front of everyone. His friends laughed, further cementing Chidi's belief that he could say whatever he wanted, and people would have no choice but to laugh along. Despite these early warning signs, Ifeoma and Tund were blinded by their desire to see their son as perfect. They still saw Chidi as the source of their good fortune, the one who had brought them out of poverty and into a world of luxury. In their eyes, he was special, deserving of everything he had, and anything less was a disservice to him. Tund, noticing how Chidi had started to act out in small ways, tried to intervene once or twice, but his concerns were quickly dismissed. "You worry too much," Ifeoma would say. "He's just being a teenager. It's a phase." As Chidi continued to grow more arrogant and entitled, Tund's unease grew, but he didn't know how to handle the situation. He was caught between wanting to discipline his son and his own guilt over their past struggles. Would disciplining Chidi now undo all the sacrifices they had made to give him everything? As time passed, Tund began to feel the weight of his own choices. He had sacrificed his principles for comfort and wealth, believing that his son deserved the life he had never known. But now, as Chidi grew older, Tund couldn't ignore the ugliness in his son's behavior. Chidi was disrespectful, arrogant, and entitled. His disregard for the value of money, effort, and respect for others was growing by the day. Tund, desperate to correct his son's path, tried talking to him about humility, hard work, and gratitude. However, every time he tried to take control, Ifeoma stepped in. She defended Chidi, believing that her son had earned his place in the world by being born into it. She told Tund, "He deserves this, Tund. We suffered, now it's his turn to enjoy life." Chidi, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly resentful of his father. He started seeing Tund as weak, someone who didn't understand the lifestyle he had grown accustomed to. "You don't get it, Dad. I'm not like you. I'm above this," Chidi would say when his father tried to talk to him. Every day, their relationship deteriorated, and Tund could feel his son slipping further from him. Tund's frustration deepened as Chitty's arrogance grew. He knew he had made a mistake, but it was too late to reverse the damage. His attempts to discipline Chitty were futile, and it became painfully clear that Ifeoma's constant indulgence was making things worse. The turning point came when Tund was in a severe car accident while traveling for work. He was left immobilized for several months, unable to manage his business or oversee daily operations. The accident came at the worst possible time. Without Tund's leadership, the business began to unravel. Clients began pulling out, and the company faced financial struggles. The luxuries the family had become accustomed to began to fade away. Chitty, who had never truly understood the fragility of their wealth, felt the change instantly. The cars were no longer as shiny, the servants were laid off, and the expensive outings became fewer. For the first time in his life, he saw his world crumble, and it terrified him. But Chitty didn't respond to the challenge with resilience. Instead, he began to act out in desperate and destructive ways. His addiction to material things intensified. He started demanding more from Ifeoma, who, to her credit, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She continued to shield Chitty from the consequences of his behavior, even as the family's financial situation worsened. Chitty's need for more was insatiable. His phone wasn't new enough, his clothes weren't expensive enough, his lifestyle wasn't lavish enough. Seeing his mother's jewelry collection, he thought, why not? After all, she had more than enough. He took several valuable pieces, thinking it would be no big deal. When he noticed that the maids and gatemen were always in the line of fire, he framed them for the theft, knowing they would never be able to prove their innocence. But even the luxury of jewelry was not enough for him. Chitty's behavior became increasingly erratic, and he turned to drugs to numb the growing emptiness he felt. The high was temporary, but it allowed him to escape the reality he couldn't bear. As his addiction deepened, he started demanding even more from his parents, pressuring them for money, for the things he thought he deserved. In a desperate attempt to fund his insatiable desires, Chitty hatched a plan that was as reckless as it was audacious. He targeted one of the luxury cars from his father's company, a sleek vehicle that symbolized the pinnacle of their wealth. Chitty knew that selling such an asset under his father's name would be risky, but the lure of quick money clouded his judgment. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, Chitty snuck into his father's office. His hands trembled slightly as he rummaged through the drawers until he found the keys and necessary documents. The gravity of what he was about to do flashed across his mind, but the thought of satisfying his desires outweighed any lingering doubts. Using the connections he had through his more dubious friends, Chitty orchestrated the sale discreetly. The buyer, a man of questionable character, didn't ask many questions, which suited Chitty just fine. The transaction was swift, and the cash filled his pockets with the promise of temporary relief from his cravings and frustrations. When Tund discovered what had happened, he was devastated. The car wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of the trust he had once placed in his son. The knowledge that Chitty had not only stolen from him but had also tarnished his name was a blow Tund could barely withstand. His health, already fragile from the accident and the stress of managing a failing business, deteriorated further. The pain of betrayal gnawed at his heart, leaving him bedridden for days. Ifeoma, upon hearing the news, was in shock. Her instinct was to protect Chitty, as she always had. But this time, the severity of the situation made even her question where she had gone wrong. She tried to comfort Tund, though her words felt hollow. For the first time, she couldn't deny that their son had crossed a line that might never be repaired. The family's financial troubles deepened, and with Tund's dismissal from his job, the future looked bleak. Tund's pride, once a pillar of strength, was now shattered, and the household that once thrived on abundance was engulfed by uncertainty. The betrayal by Chitty cut deeper than Tund could have ever imagined. The The son he once held with pride had become a stranger, a threat to his very existence. The trust that had been the cornerstone of their relationship was now irrevocably shattered. In the darkest moments, Tund felt a burning hatred for Chidi. The thought of his own flesh and blood causing such devastation left him seething with anger. In his anguish, Tund contemplated involving the police. He wanted Chidi to face the consequences of his actions, believing it was the only way to teach him the gravity of his misdeeds. But Ifeoma intervened, pleading with Tund to find another way. Her maternal instincts overrode the desire for justice, and she convinced Tund to spare Chidi from legal punishment, hoping they could guide him back to the right path. With the money from the car sale in hand, Chidi's descent into indulgence and recklessness accelerated. He spent lavishly on parties, drugs, and the company of those who only saw him as a means to an end. Each night became a blur of intoxication, his need to maintain his extravagant lifestyle, consuming every ounce of his being. But as with all things built on a foundation of vice, the money soon ran out. The luxurious nights, the artificial highs, and the fleeting sense of power dissipated, leaving Chidi with nothing but debts and the harsh reality of his actions. His parents, already struggling to make ends meet, could barely hold the family together, and Chidi's demands became unbearable. Chidi's friends, noticing his desperation and vulnerability, began planting the idea of the kidnapping subtly. They often talked about their past jobs and the large sums they made, feeding Chidi's imagination. They described it as a high-risk, high-reward venture, perfect for someone with Chidi's growing appetite for quick money. The friends used psychological manipulation, preying on Chidi's insecurities and ambitions. They praised his intelligence, making him feel special and indispensable to their plans. They also exploited his need for acceptance, positioning the kidnapping as a rite of passage into their elite circle. Drugs played a crucial role in weakening Chidi's resolve. Under the influence, his moral compass blurred, and his capacity for empathy diminished. The substances dulled his fear and heightened his sense of invincibility, making the idea of the kidnapping seem less reprehensible. Despite the drugs, Chidi's conscience occasionally surfaced. He experienced fleeting moments of doubt and regret, particularly when alone. He'd think about his family, his mother's kindness, and his father's struggles. However, these moments were fleeting, quickly suppressed by the pressure from his friends and the allure of the promised wealth. Chidi had always been a follower, never the leader. But his friends saw something in him, an eagerness to prove himself, a hunger for the kind of life they lived. And they fed into it. Slowly, subtly, they began introducing him to their darker world, making him believe that he was special, that he was destined for something bigger. "You've got the brains, Chidi. You can handle the big leagues," they would say, planting seeds of ambition in his mind, watering them with promises of wealth and power. One evening, in the haze of cigarette smoke and low-key celebrations after a successful job, one of the friends, Emeka, casually mentioned a job that was more than just a quick fix. "A big job, Chidi. The kind of money you can't even dream of. And you? You're the man for it." He spoke like it was all part of the plan, the next natural step. They made it sound easy, the perfect opportunity for someone with Chidi's desperation. They whispered about a kidnapping, one that could secure enough money to change their lives forever. They made Chidi feel like he had been chosen, like he could finally have the power he had always craved. By the time Chidi's friends brought up the kidnapping idea, he was already drowning in his own spiraling choices. The drugs had taken a firmer hold, and his judgment was clouded. The allure of quick wealth had completely overtaken him. He felt trapped, as if this was the only way out, the only way to escape the mess he had made. His friends pitched the idea like it was a simple job. Quick money, no fuss, they assured him. They painted it as an easy score, just one more job before they could disappear, live the life they'd always dreamed of. Chidi, high and desperate, agreed. It seemed like the only option left. But in the back of his mind, a small part of him hesitated. What if this was too far? The plan was already in motion. Chitty had agreed, in his desperation, to help his friends carry out a kidnapping. They had made it sound so simple, just a way to make quick money, no one would be hurt. They reassured him that it was a harmless job, that they would get in and out without a hitch. The details didn't matter, the money was all that mattered. For Chitty, the drugs had numbed his conscience. His mind, already clouded by guilt and self-loathing, couldn't process the full weight of what he was about to do. The moment they revealed the target, Chitty didn't pause. He didn't think about it too hard. His friends had already made the decision for him, all he had to do was follow through. They moved quickly, under the cover of darkness, and Chitty's nerves were frayed. He kept telling himself it was just another job, that it would all be over soon. But in his gut, a small voice whispered that something wasn't right. However, the promise of quick cash, of escaping his problems, drowned out any hesitation. As they approached the location where the victim was being held, Chitty's thoughts raced. His friends, as usual, were detached, cold, too accustomed to the violence of it all. But not Chitty. He was in too deep to back out now. He followed them into the dimly lit space, his heart thudding in his chest. And then, everything froze. There, in front of him, sat the figure of the woman, bound and gagged, eyes wide with fear. Chitty's pulse surged. His heart slammed against his chest as he stepped closer, disbelief crawling through him. A cold sweat broke out on his skin. At first, it didn't register, he couldn't process the reality of what he was seeing. But as his eyes fell on the familiar face, the shock crashed into him with full force. The woman, the one who had always been there for him, the one whose love and sacrifice had been constant throughout his life, was sitting right there in front of him. His mother, Ifeoma. The world spun. His body felt numb, as if he were outside himself, watching the scene unfold from a distance. His brain screamed in panic, but his mouth couldn't move. His legs were frozen in place. This was it. This was the moment when everything he had done, all the choices he had made, crashed down on him in a tidal wave of guilt and realization. The woman he had betrayed, the one who had always protected him, was now the victim of his greed and desperation. Chitty's mind whirled. He staggered backward, eyes wide, trying to piece together the surreal scene in front of him. His hands trembled, his breath short and ragged as the weight of the truth hit him like a freight train. His friends, oblivious to the change in him, moved around him as if nothing had happened. But Chitty couldn't hear them. His focus was on the woman in front of him, the mother he had never fully appreciated until now. He had agreed to this. He had played a part in the nightmare unfolding before him. "Chitty, what are you standing there for?" Emeka asked, his voice sharp, breaking through Chitty's daze. "Move, man. We've got a ransom to collect." But Chitty could only stare at the woman, the realization setting in. He had signed up for this. His addiction, his need for approval, had led him to this moment. And now, as his mother sat there, helpless, scared, betrayed, he knew there was no way back. There was no redemption. Finally, Chitty found his voice, but it was barely above a whisper. "What have I done?" His friends, sensing his hesitation, turned toward him. They weren't surprised, not really. They knew how to handle it. Emeka stepped forward, his face hardening. "You wanted this, Chitty. You've come this far. Don't back out now." Chitty's heart pounded, his hands shaking as he looked at his mother, his guilt choking him. He wanted to scream, to run, to undo everything. But he knew it was too late. The consequences of his actions were staring him in the face, and there was no escaping them. As he stood there, Paralyzed by the horror of what he had done, the friends closed in around him, pushing him forward. The job wasn't over yet. There was money to be made, and Chitty's own humanity was slipping further away with every step he took. Chitty sat alone in the dimly lit room, his mind a storm of guilt and regret. The voices of his friends echoed in his ears, their ruthless plans for his mother becoming clearer with every passing moment. He couldn't shake the image of her soft smile, the way she would hum a tune while cooking, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. He knew he had to act, but the weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him. Tun's hands shook as he read the chilling message from Ifeoma, his heart seizing in his chest. Her words, short but sharp with fear, pierced through the fog of his exhaustion and frailty. Tund, I'm being kidnapped. Masked men. Please, they're taking me. The world around him seemed to crumble. He had always known that life could throw curveballs, but this was a nightmare beyond his worst fears. Ifeoma, the woman he had loved and cherished for years, was now in the clutches of ruthless men. The thought of her being dragged away, helpless and vulnerable, ignited a storm of emotions inside him. A wave of terror mixed with guilt and a primal need to protect, to do something, anything to save her. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he tried to steady his shaking hands to call their son, Chitty. His mind raced with thoughts of what he could do. His body, however, was failing him. He dialed Chitty's number urgently, but there was no answer. His heart sank even further as the cold realization washed over him. Chitty was absent when his mother needed him the most. In that moment, Tund felt an overwhelming wave of disappointment. He had tried, so hard, to give his son everything, to help him become a man of integrity and strength. But now, Chitty's absence, his inability to even pick up the phone in such a critical moment, was a stark reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Tund had always hoped that his son would be the one to rise to the occasion, to show bravery and loyalty. But now, it was clear, Chitty was lost in a world of his own, and Tund was alone in his fight to save Ifeoma. With his hands trembling and his mind a whirlwind of emotions, Tund didn't hesitate any longer. He took the next step, gathering the strength he had left, and called the police. His voice trembled as he explained the situation, barely able to hold back his tears. But in the depth of his fear and despair, something stirred within him, determination. He was going to save Ifeoma, no matter the cost. Despite his frailty, despite everything, he wasn't going to give up. This was his wife, and nothing in this world, not even his failing body, would stop him from trying to bring her back. As he hung up with the police, the reality of the situation hit him like a wave. The fear of losing Ifeoma gripped him tightly as the police prepared to storm the hideout. Chitty sat in the corner, his heart hammering in his chest. His friends' voices, once filled with camaraderie, now sounded like distant echoes in his ears. Their laughter, their casual talk about hurting Ifeoma, it felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Every word they spoke was a knife, twisting deeper into his soul, and he couldn't stay silent any longer. In the haze of guilt, fear, and anger, Chitty realized what he had to do. His mother, his loving, kind mother, was bound and helpless because of him, because of his mistakes, his weakness. And now, she was in the hands of these monsters, who spoke about her life as if it meant nothing. He could hear one of them talking about using Ifeoma as leverage, but it was the mention of harm that sent a chill through him. That was it. His moment of clarity. No more running, no more silence. Without wasting a second, Chitty pulled out his phone and sent a secret text to the police, his hands shaking as he typed. He described the layout of the hideout, the number of men, and the room where his mother was held. He knew the consequences of his actions. He was risking everything, his safety, his relationship with his parents, maybe even his life, but in that moment, all that mattered was stopping them from hurting her. As soon as the message was sent, he could hear the distant wail of sirens, growing louder by the second. The police were coming. Outside, the officers had surrounded the hideout, ready to launch their assault. Flashbangs were primed to go off at any moment, but inside, the men remained blissfully unaware of the imminent danger. They continued their twisted conversation, oblivious to the fact that Chitty had just betrayed them. The ringleader paced, his back turned, unaware of the ticking clock. Chitty didn't care anymore about his friends, or the mess he'd made. All that mattered was his mother. The moment the police stormed the building, chaos erupted. Flashbangs exploded, filling the air with blinding light and deafening noise. Men scrambled, disoriented and panicked, trying to flee or retaliate. But Chitty wasn't focused on them. He was focused on her. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw her, his mother, tied to a chair in the corner, her face a mixture of terror and confusion. But when her eyes met his, a flicker of recognition passed between them. For a split second, he could see the relief in her eyes, but that relief was quickly replaced by worry. "Chitty," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper, barely a breath. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here," he whispered, moving toward her, his body moving on pure instinct, propelled by love and desperation. Just as he reached her, one of the men, the same one who had raised the gun earlier, appeared in front of them, aiming a weapon straight at Ifeoma. Chitty's blood ran cold. In that moment, his world shrank down to one single thought: I can't let them hurt her. Not again. Not like this. Without thinking, without hesitation, Chitty leapt in front of her, positioning himself between the gunman and his mother. His heart pounded as he faced the man, his hands trembling at his sides, but his mind was made up. "Don't do it!" Chitty shouted, his voice cracking with fear and desperation. "Please. Don't hurt her. I'll do whatever you want, but please, don't hurt my mother." The gunman's face twisted in uncertainty, but before he could respond, a deafening shot rang out. Chitty's body jerked backward as the bullet tore through his side, the pain a searing, gut-wrenching agony that dropped him to his knees. His vision blurred, the room spinning as he collapsed to the ground. If you had asked him later what had happened, Chitty would have said it felt like time stopped in that moment, the moment the bullet struck. But what he felt was no longer fear, no longer guilt. What he felt was his mother's touch, her hands trembling as she reached out to him, pulling him close. "Mum." "I'm sorry," Chitty gasped, the pain in his voice far more evident than the words themselves. He could barely breathe as the world around him began to fade. If he hadn't already made a million mistakes, if this wasn't the mess he had created, if only he could have saved her before the pain, before the bullet found its way into his side. But then, he felt it. Her warmth, her tears, as she pressed her hands against his wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. "You'll be all right, Chitty. You'll be all right," Ifeoma sobbed, her voice filled with raw anguish. She kissed his forehead, her body shaking with the weight of the moment. But there was no time to be certain of anything. The police were closing in. The gunman who had shot Chitty was being restrained by officers, and the remaining men were being arrested, one by one. The chaos was turning into order, but the chaos inside Chitty's body was just beginning. As the world around him began to blur and fade, he could hear his mother's voice, still crying out to him, still pleading for him to stay with her. But all Chitty could do was hold onto her hand as tight as he could, praying that somehow, he hadn't made a mistake too large to undo. Ifeoma screamed, her voice a raw, heart-wrenching sound that echoed off the walls. She cradled Chitty's body, her tears mingling with the blood staining his shirt. The paramedics arrived, their movements swift and urgent, as they worked to stabilize Chitty. At the hospital, Ifeoma sat by Chitty's side, her hands clutching his, refusing to let go. Tund, though still recovering from his accident, stood beside her, his face etched with sorrow and guilt. They watched as the doctors worked tirelessly to save their son. At the hospital, the air was heavy with tension. Ifeoma sat by Chidi's side, her hands wrapped around his, never letting go. She had been by his side through it all, through the pain, the fear, and the helplessness of watching her son struggle. Her heart was breaking for him, but she refused to show it. She knew that Chidi needed her strength more than ever. Tund, though still physically fragile from his accident, stood beside her, his face lined with deep sorrow. His once strong frame seemed even smaller now, weakened by his own injuries and the overwhelming guilt that weighed heavily on his chest. He had failed his son in so many ways. He had failed to protect him from the darkness that had clouded Chidi's heart. And now, they were here, in this sterile hospital room, watching their son fight for his life. As doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Chidi, the uncertainty hung in the air. The sound of the machines, the beeping of the monitors, filled the silence, and yet, all they could do was wait. They were helpless in the face of what had happened. Days passed before Chidi finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and his body tensed as the sharp realization set in. He couldn't move his legs. He couldn't feel them. The doctors had warned him, but the harsh reality of it hit him like a freight train. His legs, once a symbol of his freedom, were now immobile. He was paralyzed. Despair consumed him in the moments that followed. He couldn't believe what was happening. The weight of everything he had done, the kidnapping, the betrayal, and now this, seemed too much to bear. He wanted to give up, to let go of the fight. But then, through the fog of pain and self-loathing, he heard his mother's voice. "I'm here, Chidi. We'll get through this together," Ifeoma whispered, her hand gently brushing his cheek. Her voice was a lifeline, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. She had always been there for him, even when he didn't deserve it. And now, more than ever, he needed her to hold on to him. Tund, though still recovering, squeezed his son's shoulder with quiet strength. "You're not alone, son. We're with you. We'll find a way through this." The days that followed were agonizing, but with each passing hour, Chidi began to find a glimmer of hope. His mother's constant presence, her unwavering love, and Tund's quiet strength became the anchor he desperately needed. Slowly, he started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild his life from this shattered place. But life had other plans. Chidi's involvement in the kidnapping didn't go unnoticed, and despite the sympathy he garnered from those closest to him, the law took its course. As soon as he was well enough to stand trial, Chidi was arrested for his role in the crime. The charges were severe: kidnapping, conspiracy, and the near death of his own mother. He had betrayed the people who had loved him the most, and the consequences were unforgiving. As the handcuffs were placed on him, Chidi felt his world crumble even further. The guilt of what he had done, of what he had put his family through, weighed on him even more heavily than his physical injuries. He was going to prison. And he deserved it. Ifeoma, though devastated by what had happened, refused to turn her back on him. She visited him every day, sitting across from him in the sterile visiting room, her heart breaking with every glance at her son. She knew he had made a terrible mistake, but he was still her son, and she would be there for him. She spoke to him about the future, about redemption, about the possibility of making things right. Tund, too, made his presence felt. Though he couldn't be there physically in the way he had once been, his support remained unwavering. He wrote letters to Chidi, offering guidance, reminding him of the values he had instilled in him long ago. He didn't give up on his son. Not yet. In prison, Chidi was forced to confront the man he had become, the one who had betrayed his mother, the one who had caused his family so much pain. It was a brutal reckoning, but it was necessary. It wasn't just his body that was broken, it was his spirit, too. And the long months in prison were a painful journey of self-reflection. But there were moments of clarity amid the despair. In prison, Chitty found a support group, a place where people who had made mistakes, who had fallen far, could share their stories and find solace in each other. For the first time in a long time, Chitty felt like he wasn't entirely alone. There, he learned that redemption wasn't something you earned overnight, but something you worked toward every day, no matter how small the steps seemed. Through the group, Chitty found new strength, and his resolve began to shift. He wasn't just going to sit in prison and wallow in his regret. He was going to change. He was going to make amends, not just with his family, but with himself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he saw a glimmer of light on the horizon. Back home, Ifioma and Tund found their roles changing. Tund, despite his own struggles, began to take a more active role in guiding Chitty. His own recovery, though slow, had given him a new perspective, one that he was determined to share with his son. He wrote to Chitty, offering words of wisdom, urging him to keep fighting for redemption, no matter how hard it seemed. Ifioma remained the rock, the unwavering force holding the family together. Her faith in Chitty never wavered, even when it seemed like he had lost everything. She visited him regularly, bringing news from home, offering encouragement, reminding him that there was always a path forward, no matter how dark the journey might seem. The narrative closed on a note of resilience. Chitty's journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. His road to redemption would be long and fraught with challenges, but he had found a new determination within himself. And with the support of his family, Chitty was ready to start the painful process of rebuilding, not just his body, but his life. The mistakes of the past would always be with him, but they no longer defined him. What mattered now was the man he was becoming, the man who would fight, every day, to make things right. Though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: Chitty was no longer the boy who had betrayed his family. He was something new, someone ready to make amends, no matter how difficult the road ahead.